you have this leaderless open source monetary technology that was created as a protest against the existing banking system, and initially was nothing really more than an experiment. It wasn't worth anything more than what the initial first handful of people believed it would be, and they decided to exchange electricity for Bitcoin. But it didn't have any monetary premium. It wasn't worth even a penny or a cent or a mark or whatever. It wasn't worth anything. Um, but over time, people ascribed it value, and now it's worth a lot. Now it's worth more than $1 trillion. So it's interesting that what drives the adoption of this technology is people ascribing value and self-interest, and people trying to, uh, you know, essentially make money in their own way. Some people, probably a minority of people who use Bitcoin, truly believe in its transformational power. In that it's not really here to it's not a tool for making money. It's a tool for fixing the money. And you would never really want to trade Bitcoin for a subpar monetary technology like the dollar or the euro or something like that. But that's kind of like um, a very small percentage, I think, of the user base. Most people think of Bitcoin like a stock, or perhaps real estate, or some sort of speculative asset, and the game is to buy some and then sell some later. And they're in their head, they're denominating in dollars or in euros or in whatever currency they're in. So the majority of people are still living in the old world, and they're looking at Bitcoin as this thing to sort of hold for a temporary amount of time. And now, and again, then there's a small group of people who are like, no, 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 no. This is what you're going to want in the future. You're not going to want any of that other stuff. But you know what? The network doesn't care, doesn't discriminate, doesn't really care about what the ideology of its users are. It doesn't really care, who owns, in what sort of construct the UTXOs are dispersed in. It doesn't really care who's running the nodes. It doesn't really care who's contributing hash power. It doesn't care at all. So what's inevitably happened is a mainstreamization of this currency, where it goes from worth nothing and nobody knows about it to being a top 10 most valuable global currency worth more than $1 trillion, used all over the world, and now being adopted by nation states, being mined by a variety of large countries, and now being a topic of discussion, in the presidential conversations of the largest country in the most dominant economic power in the world. And to this point, I mean, it's been discussed by every world power, whether it be the U.S. and what former President Trump has been saying, whether it be in China, where the Chinese government has been more aggressive against it. The point is that each world power has sort of had to grapple with it so far, which is kind of amazing. And I think that's going to just grow from here. But the idea is that as you have the mainstreamization of this currency, as it goes from zero to what I and many other people believe will be its sort of destiny, is to be the reserve currency of the world, basically. As it goes on that journey, it attracts a lot of users who don't care about its cypherpunk elements, who don't care about its freedom upside. All they care about is making money. They're still stuck in this old mentality that I referenced about trying to make as many dollars as possible. And again, there's that old meme in Bitcoin where it's from the Matrix, and it's Neo and Neo and Morpheus, and Neo's asking Morpheus, you know, w- are you telling me that I can trade my Bitcoin for millions someday? And Morpheus says, no, Neo. What I'm telling you is when you're ready, you won't have to. And this is the greatest meme in Bitcoin history, and it refers to this idea that, like, if you hold long enough, you know, you won't need to sell the Bitcoin for dollars. Bitcoin will be the currency. You can use it for whatever you want. So I think that that's quite powerful, and you're seeing that start to manifest, right? You're seeing, the Bitcoin economy start to come alive in bits and corners of the earth, especially on the internet. But I would say we're still far away from that. We're still in this kind of adoption phase where, people are they want price exposure to it. They're still thinking in dollars or euros, but they think that Bitcoin is something that can make them more dollars or euros. But again, the network doesn't really care. So now you have ETFs, so you have, like, essentially derivatives of Bitcoin ownership, whereby, you'll have companies like BlackRock, Fidelity, buying up a bunch of Bitcoin, ostensibly. We'll see, but buying up a bunch of real Bitcoin, and then allowing their clients to quote unquote own it through a security, right? So we'll see where that goes. I mean, clearly it's gone. I mean, there's I believe as of today, more than $50 billion of these things. There's wrapped Bitcoin. There's custodial Bitcoin. So we'll see what happens with all of that. But in general, the idea has just been, increasing demand for this thing. And what they don't really realize is that this thing is a very powerful freedom tool. I don't think the average Bitcoin user has any idea. I think that the average person exposed to Bitcoin is probably exposed to it in a custodial sense. Maybe they own an IOU on a scheme like PayPal, or an exchange, or even a derivative like an ETF. I don't think they've gone through the work of trying to self custody and be sovereign. But again, that's okay. The point is that the thesis is that you have this, over time, exponentially increasing demand for this technology, and at the end of the day, it makes the core network stronger. So what is the core network? The core network is a freedom tool. The core network allows anyone in the world, regardless of who they are, the ability to transact and communicate and interact with each other. Doesn't care who you are, what country you're in, what gender you are, what you believe in, what your wealth status is. The network just doesn't care at all. So it's a peer-to-peer exchange mechanism, right? So this bizarre, self-interested Wall Street, you know, Silicon Valley, demand for Bitcoin, which is just going to rise, as people, with whatever narrative people want, digital gold, free speech money, whatever. For most people, it'll be this digital gold type narrative, right? And that's just continuing. I mean, we're just seeing that continue. It's kind of surreal, but there's just increased adoption constantly. Every month, there's 3, 4, 5, 6 new milestones that are hit in terms of adoption. And again, the majority of these people, they don't care about the cypherpunk, the civil libertarian ethos of the technology. They probably haven't even looked at the technology. So this is the trick. So Bitcoin's trick, much like the Trojan horse, much like the way that the Greeks hid inside the literal Trojan horse and snuck in to the city of Troy and managed to win an otherwise impossible victory, was subterfuge. And that's really what Bitcoin's doing. It is practicing subterfuge. That's what its core mechanism is. It presents itself as a investment, as something that's going to make you rich, and that appeals to basically everybody in the whole world. So eventually, over time, the world is going to be increasingly interested in this thing. What they don't realize is what's buried inside, right? And what's buried inside is this decentralized, censorship-resistant, permissionless, programmable, open source money that can liberate and empower individuals. And increasingly, we're seeing new tools that allow us to use this thing in ways that people had never even imagined. I mean, in this year alone, We've gotten new privacy boosts for Bitcoin usage through silent payments and Bolt 12, and it's just a very exciting time for Bitcoin privacy. Um, and at the same time, you're seeing different ways to decentralize mining, and different ways to mine at home, to mine small miners. This summer, what's called a bidax mined a block, which is crazy. Basically, one open sourced little tiny miner, like looks like a graphics card essentially. It won the lottery improbably and mined $200,000 of Bitcoin. This happened in July. Now the odds are very low that that would happen, but the point is it happens. Like it proves to you that small mining and decentralized mining can be quite valuable. So you know, all the while you're seeing like the mainstreamification of this thing, it continues to get more cypherpunk. Like the actual way that people can use it continues to get more cypherpunk. I mean, not just through privacy improvements and stuff happening on Lightning, but there's other ways, other clever ways people are figuring out how to use this thing in a way that's more or less trustless or permissionless, which is all very, very exciting. So, I mean, the Trojan horse for freedom thesis really is that you have governments and nation states and Wall Street and all the big banks, and they're all going to want a piece of Bitcoin in some way. And they're probably going to want to neuter it or disempower it, like for the end user, meaning that they're not going to want to sell the real thing. They're going to want to sell like a security of it or a derivative of it, whatever. That's up to them. The point is, at the end of the day, the demand for the currency is going up, and the value of it versus things like dollars or oil or real estate is going to go up, and that just it's a positive feedback loop. More and more people will pour in. More and more and more people are going to want it, um, and that's a beautiful thing because it's like for the first time in human history, in many ways, we have this machine that turns self-interest into greater good for all. That has not transpired with things like free trade and global capitalism. That hasn't really worked out. Like you know, there's shared economic interests between communities and countries, but there's been a huge amount of exploitation. Um, I would not say that is how global economics has really transpired. A lot of times you're succeeding at the expense of somebody else. Bitcoin, we have a radically new paradigm. I mean, you are inevitably helping somebody else. If you're adopting Bitcoin just to get rich or as part of some ETF scheme or whatever, it doesn't really matter. If you're some king and you're trying to stack it and confiscate it, it doesn't really matter. As you drive the value of this thing and you ascribe more value to this thing, it helps everybody in the world. That's astonishing. So yeah, it's basically this machine that turns greed into freedom, and that's a valuable ally for the human rights cause because, frankly, we don't have very many friends in the human rights struggle. I mean, most governments are two-faced. They'll say one thing, they'll do the other. I mean, look at Germany. I mean, Merkel, sold a lot of Germany out to the Chinese Communist Party. Um, Schroeder. I mean, you had a lot of people very friendly to Putin. So you had this Western democratic country hollowing out its morals for cash. Um, and that's how it is with my country, the United States, and most large democratic nations. We're very happy to support the Saudis if it means that it'll protect our oil for money, arrangement or whatever. The point is, human rights is sort of like usually a cosmetic thing that we may mention, but we're not really interested in promoting it abroad. Is very, very clear. We might be a little more interested than some other countries, and maybe that's important. That's fine. The Chinese government's certainly not interested in it. But the point is, at the end of the day, uh, you know, the powers that be leave much to be desired as, let's say, allies in the struggle for human rights. And, communities can feel pretty disempowered. With Bitcoin, we have this remarkable coordinated global protest that's basically unstoppable. And it's unstoppable because it doesn't rely on altruism. It doesn't rely on, oh, we should do a good thing. We should, we should sacrifice for the greater good. That's not gonna be enough in the end. If you're charitable endeavor relies on altruism, it's just not going to be enough to get it done. Whereas Bitcoin doesn't rely on that stuff. You know, Bitcoin absolutely only relies on interest, on self interest. Okay, so we could finish the Q&A if you want.
To what extent can Bitcoin contribute to voting with your feet, picking up speed again? And if so, is this unreservedly good for society?
I mean, unreservedly good is probably hard to commit to, but I mean, clearly this allows people to be free and to choose where they want to be in a much easier sense. If you have a monetary network that doesn't care where you live, you can much more easily choose where you want to work and where you want to go to school. You can bring that asset with you in a frictionless way. So, yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely helps people become, digital nomads. And we still have the traditional frictions of nationhood and stateship and all these things, but at the end of the day, it's really helpful to have an open global currency that's the same everywhere, and it allows people to move around. I mean, just think about it. I mean, if you have Bitcoin and you travel some other country, you don't need to like call your credit card to tell them you're traveling, or you don't need to deal with a declined purchase. Like, your money will work everywhere. It doesn't care. And I think that's very empowering.
Yeah, great. Talking a little bit about your work and your book. So I'm a little bit question.
Sure.
When did you first discover that Bitcoin could play an important role in protection for human rights, and what impact did this have on your work at the Human Rights Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, that took me a while, but I would say probably that I finally started grasping this in a serious way around 2017. And it allowed us to be, I think, a lot more powerful in terms of offering a tool to all of these activists that we knew that can help them reach anyone around the world and connect and be empowered in a way that really wasn't possible before. I mean, funding makes activism work. So to have a new funding technology that can't be stopped is extremely profound. So that's been very helpful for us.
Great. Can you probably give some examples?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If you send a bank wire to a journalist in Egypt, the regime is going to see the bank wire. It's going to be in giant capital letters, Human Rights Foundation. Whether you send it in euros or dollars doesn't really matter. And then they're going to call that person in for questioning, and they're probably going to confiscate the assets and arrest the person. So, like, bank wires, fiat money, is no longer a reasonable way to fund activism inside dictatorships. It's like very, very difficult to do that and very dangerous and risky. Bitcoin allows us to make a direct payment to that journalist where they don't have to disclose that to the regime. I mean, this is completely groundbreaking. Now, of course, you could use stable coins or other crypto assets for this as well, but a lot of those things are harder to convert on the other end. Very, they don't have the same protections over time, and I don't think you're going to see the same user bases and communities. So I think Bitcoin's going to end up being the backbone for this.
Great. So the next question. Bitcoin was apparently a good proof of concept experiment that literally got out of control. So I'm not sure what this means. Do you think that
Yeah.
Ethereum has more practical use cases?
I mean, I don't.
That,
Let's put it this way. I think Bitcoin. It's true that it was a thought experiment, but I'm not sure I would say it got out of control. I mean, I think the creators, the very first developers, within the first year predicted essentially world domination. Like they were trying to make something that would change the world. So I'm not sure it would just say got out of control. I think, I don't agree with this. I think Ethereum has very few practical use cases beyond being a network for stable coins, and it's really not even doing that anymore because people use Tron as a stable coin layer one, or they use some other blockchain. So I don't know how many practical use cases Ethereum has. It's performed way worse than Bitcoin, uh, financially recently. Um, it doesn't offer any of the same decentralization guarantees, given that it switched to proof of stake. Um, so I don't know if it has very many practical use cases beyond. I mean, the main use case of Ethereum was to enrich the creators. The creators got super rich. That was a very good use case for Ethereum. They took a lot of people's Bitcoin, and they did that essentially out of thin air. That was an incredible use case for Ethereum, and that's really the use case for most of crypto, is to enrich the issuers. Um, Beyond that, I don't really see Ethereum. It's not really related to Bitcoin. It's just a totally different technology. I don't really see it competing, or it just does very different things. It has nothing to do with the physical world. It's not connected or tethered to the physical world in the way that Bitcoin is through mining. It doesn't offer any of the same issuance guarantees. It isn't scarce. Like it just is a very different thing. I mean, it's a programmable crypto asset, and there's a lot of those. I mean, Solana and Cardano and whatever, and we'll see. We'll see we'll see what happens with those things. I would predict that they over time go to zero against Bitcoin in terms of value, and that more centralized competition kind of eats their lunch when it comes to use cases.
I would like to add to my question. I mean, with out of control, it's not controlled by a single person or the developers anymore. There are lots of forks which try to overcome one limit that makes it unusable to replace all the digital transactions in the world, which is the limit of the block size. So even if you would say Bitcoin is the future of all financial transaction, it's not made for this, and technically it can only be changed by forking the blockchain. And that's why I came up with Ethereum, which obviously scales better and also allows you to do smart contracts with independence of a central organization, and without the necessity to do proof of work for verifying transactions. So I thought maybe Bitcoin was a good start, but maybe there's another type of blockchain which can solve all the problems that Bitcoin tried to solve in the first place.
Well, I mean, so first of all, Bitcoin changes all the time without forks. You don't need forks to change Bitcoin. If you sign up to Bitcoin Optech newsletter, you'll see Bitcoin is evolving constantly. There are major consensus changes that require what we call in Bitcoin a soft fork, which are opt-in. There are no hard forks in Bitcoin culture, really. Hard forks is an Ethereum culture thing. Hard forks is more similar to like normal software, where like, oh, it's time to update your computer, and you don't have like a choice. You either update or you fall out of consensus and you're doing your own little thing that nobody really cares about. When Ethereum rolled back the blockchain to edit the blockchain in 2016, and Ethereum Classic was created, I mean, the people who didn't want to edit the blockchain, they got basically screwed over. I mean, their token became pretty worthless. So you have a small group of people in charge, and they can change it, and they can do whatever they want with it. That's a very different way of evolving than Bitcoin, which requires consensus from its participants and where there is no hard forking. I mean, hard forking is a very authoritarian way to approach things. So, I mean, I think that you can have highly centralized digital asset systems. I mean, the blockchain is really just a useless word. It's not that helpful. I mean, Satoshi didn't even use the word. It was later created by marketing people to try an affinity scam off of Bitcoin. I think what we mean here is like digital assets that can be sent around without ID. And I think that the most successful version so far is Tether on Tron. and that's totally, become very dominant. Now we'll see. I don't think that'll be the case in a few years. I mean, Tron is going to become too expensive and people move on to something else. But the point is that people never, people didn't really value the decentralization that Ethereum claimed to offer in the first place. What they just wanted was cheap fees. So you're going to see those systems change over time to meet market dynamics. I mean, we'll see where that goes. But I mean, I think stable coins are very interesting. They're just obviously very, very different than Bitcoin. And clearly Satoshi was not trying to create a stable coin. Like they were trying to destroy the US dollar, basically. So we have two very different agendas here.
Thank you.
Next question. Are you aware of any initiative that is fostering to establish shared global privacy networks in order to protect individuals from governmental harassment? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say the Bitcoin network is a good one. You can mine Bitcoin and you can run nodes and you can allow people to transact without needing to provide identification. I would say there's a big difference between anonymity and pseudonymity. Pseudonymity is extremely powerful, right? So it's true that on-chain Bitcoin, is not, a black box. Like there are things you can do to trace the flow of funds. But so long as you never tie your real world identity to your Bitcoin activity, it's a very powerful privacy technology. So yeah, you can contribute to the Bitcoin network. You can do that. I mean, the Tor project is another really good one. People debate about, I think, the full utility of it and how compromised it has been. But I mean, I think from everything I understand, I think it's still very worthy to contribute to the Tor project. So I think those are two good ones where you can kind of contribute your resources and run a node and be involved. So maybe we take one more question.
So okay, I have a last one. How do authoritarian regimes react to Bitcoin? What are they doing to prevent the adoption?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is they're not trying to do a 51% attack. This idea that people were going to attack Bitcoin at the network level was always science fiction. What they're doing is they're trying to punish the users. So they'll try to make it illegal to use, or they'll try to crack down or tax or whatever. But it's interesting. Eventually, what they're going to want is they're going to want to have their cake and eat it too. They're going to want to use Bitcoin at the state level, but they're not going to want the people to use it as a currency because that takes power from the state, right? So Putin signed a law last year saying that Russians aren't allowed to pay for anything with Bitcoin. But at the same time, Putin's advisors have explored using Bitcoin as an energy and trade asset. So I think this is what you're going to see. You're going to see these regimes try and use Bitcoin for their own purposes while trying to prevent their population from adopting it. And that's not going to work. I mean, people are going to see this thing and they're going to find ways to access it. And they are. And it's currently being used under every single dictatorship. And there's really nothing that those dictators can do to stop it. And that fills me with enormous hope. So I think that's a good way to end. I would say nothing's inevitable or unstoppable, but Bitcoin has particular qualities that really help it evolve in a very hostile world where freedom technologies are endangered species. This totally changes the model because it has a different incentive structure, and it's incentivized so that anybody wants some, regardless of whether or not they want to help the human rights cause. I mean, it basically turns anyone into some sort of human rights activist, which is pretty cool. So anyway, that's the talk. That's the thesis. Follow my work online. I've got a couple books, including some in German, that you can check out, courtesy Apricot Media. I think they've published "Check Your Financial Privilege," which I believe the title is "The Trojan Horse for Freedom" in German. You can check out my new book, Hidden Repression, and I have more stuff coming. And you can follow me on social media on Noster, as well as on X. So I hope to see you guys around.
So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Later.